The small town rested between rolling hills and winding rivers, where the mornings smelled of wet soil and the evenings echoed with the sound of wind through the trees. In one corner of that town stood a modest house with peeling paint and a single piano sitting by the window. That piano was the heart of the home. It belonged to a blind girl named Lily, who had never seen the sunrise but could describe it better than anyone who had. She said she could feel it, through warmth on her face, through the change in the air, through the hum of life that began with the morning birds. Lily had been blind since birth. She never saw colors, but she could sense emotions and sounds. The piano was her world, her voice, and her friend. Her mother had taught her to play when she was a child. Though her mother had passed away years ago, Lily could still remember her laughter, soft and bright, each time she struck the right note. Those memories were all she had left, her mother's hands guiding hers over the keys, teaching her to let her heart lead the melody. Her father worked at a small mechanic shop on the edge of town. He was a quiet man, tired but kind. Each evening, when he returned home covered in oil and sweat, he'd stand by the window and listen as his daughter played. The music washed away his exhaustion. It filled the small house with warmth and peace. Sometimes he would close his eyes and think, if only her mother could hear this. Lily practiced for hours every day. She didn't play because she wanted to be famous or admired. She played because it was how she spoke to the world. Every melody told a story, her hopes, her fears, her dreams. Sometimes she played fast, like laughter. Sometimes slow, like rain. Her fingers had memorized every key on that old piano, even though some of them were cracked and out of tune. When one of the keys finally broke, she cried quietly that night, afraid her world was falling apart piece by piece. Her father noticed the silence the next morning. When he asked why she wasn't playing, she tried to smile and said it was nothing. But he could see the pain in her expression. He promised to fix the piano even though he didn't have the money. For weeks he worked extra hours at the shop, coming home late and tired. Then one day he brought her a small box with replacement keys and said, "It's not much, but I think this will bring your friend back to life." Lily ran her fingers over the smooth new keys and whispered, "Thank you." That night the house filled with music again, softer, but full of gratitude. Lily often played at the park near the town center, where there was an old upright piano that anyone could use. She sat there for hours, feeling the cool breeze and listening to the world around her. The sound of children laughing, birds chirping, footsteps passing by. Some people stopped to listen, while others rushed past without noticing, but those who did stop often found themselves unable to leave. Her music had a way of touching hearts. It wasn't polished or perfect, but it was real. One afternoon, as she played a tune she had made up herself, a man approached her and listened quietly. When she finished, he clapped softly and said, "That was beautiful. What's your name?" She smiled shyly and told him. The man introduced himself as part of a community arts group that supported young musicians. He said, "We're hosting a concert in the city next month. Would you like to perform?" Lily's hands trembled. She had never played for a big audience. She hesitated, but her father encouraged her. "You should do it," he said. "Your mother would be proud." That night, Lily couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, touching the keys gently, imagining what it would be like to play in a hall full of people. She wasn't nervous about playing the piano. She was nervous about being seen. People often looked at her differently when they noticed her white cane. Some pitied her. Some ignored her. She didn't want sympathy. She wanted to be heard for her music, not her blindness. In the following weeks, she practiced even harder. Her father would wake up at night and hear the faint sound of piano notes drifting through the walls. She'd be sitting there, completely lost in her world, her head tilted slightly as if listening to the piano speak back to her. Sometimes she played until her fingers ached. When her father asked if she needed rest, she'd just smile and say, "I'm almost there, Papa. I can feel it." Every day she learned something new. She didn't have sheet music, and instead she remembered each melody by feeling. She would hum to herself, repeating the rhythm until it sank deep into her memory. When she finally mastered a piece, she'd whisper a quiet thank you to her mother, believing she could still hear her somewhere beyond. The day before the concert, she and her father traveled to the city for the first time. The tall buildings overwhelmed her. The sounds were louder, sharper, cars, voices, footsteps. She clutched her father's arm tightly. "It's okay," he said softly. "Just focus on your music." The rest doesn't matter. They reached the concert hall, a grand, shining place filled with marble floors and glittering chandeliers. Lily could feel the vibration of voices around her, the hum of excitement. For a moment she felt out of place, like a small note lost in a big symphony. But then she touched the piano on stage during rehearsal and instantly she found herself again. It didn't matter where she was, the piano was home. She didn't know much about the other performers, but she overheard someone mention a name, Adrian Cole. He was one of the world's most respected pianists, known for his flawless technique and cold personality. People admired his precision but also feared his arrogance. Lily didn't think much about him. She was too focused on her own performance. Yet later that evening, as she was leaving the hall, she accidentally bumped into someone. A man's irritated voice said, "Watch where you're going." His tone was sharp, impatient. Her father quickly apologized and explained that his daughter couldn't see. There was a short silence, then a faint, dismissive laugh. "A blind pianist?" the man murmured. "Interesting." He walked away before she could respond. Lily's heart sank, though she said nothing. That voice stayed with her the entire night. It wasn't anger she felt, it was sadness. She didn't want anyone to think she was incapable. As she lay in bed, she whispered to herself, "I'll show them. Not with words. With music." The next morning, the sun rose over the city, but Lily couldn't see it. Still, she felt its warmth. She knew it was going to be an important day. The beginning of something bigger than she had ever imagined. Her father helped her get ready, straightening her dress and whispering encouragement. "Just be yourself," he said. "Play from your heart." At the concert hall, she could sense the crowd gathering. The murmur of voices, the sound of shoes against the floor, the subtle scent of perfume. All of it painted a picture in her mind. Backstage, she could hear other performers warming up. Their notes were perfect, calculated, confident. She smiled faintly, realizing she was different. Her music wasn't about perfection. It was about connection. When it was her turn to go on stage, she took a deep breath and held her father's hand. He guided her to the piano and whispered, "I'll be right here." She reached out, touching the piano gently. It was larger and smoother than the one she had at home, but the feel of the keys was familiar. She sat down, adjusted her posture, and placed her fingers over the keys. The hall grew quiet. She could sense hundreds of eyes watching her, waiting to see what she could do. At first, she hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly. Then she remembered the broken piano key her father had fixed, her mother's laughter, and the promise she made to herself. She smiled softly and began to play. The first notes floated through the air like whispers. They were soft, uncertain at first, but soon grew stronger. The melody told a story, and her story. Every rise and fall, every pause carried emotion. The audience could feel it. They leaned forward, drawn into her world of sound and feeling. Her father stood backstage, his eyes wet with pride. When she finished the final note, there was silence. A deep, heavy silence, and the kind that holds emotion too big for words. For a moment, Lily thought maybe she had failed. Maybe they didn't like it. Then slowly the audience began to clap. The sound grew louder, stronger, until it filled the entire hall. She couldn't see the people standing, but she could hear the sound of their applause and the rhythm of their admiration. Lily smiled through tears she didn't even realize were falling. Somewhere in the audience, the renowned pianist who had laughed at her sat still, his expression unreadable. But in that moment, Lily didn't need his approval. The music had already spoken for her. And though this was just the beginning, it was a beginning that would soon echo around the world, one note at a time. The night after the concert, the little apartment room was filled with a silence that felt peaceful. The soft light of a single lamp glowed near the piano, where the girl sat with her fingers gently resting on the keys. Her father stood by the window, still amazed at what had happened that day. He had never seen a crowd react like that before, standing, clapping, some even crying. It was something he would never forget. Lily sat quietly, trying to replay the performance in her mind. She could still hear the sound of the applause echoing in her heart. But she didn't think about the fame or attention that might come from it. She only thought about the feeling, that moment when everything around her had disappeared and only the music had remained. It had been like breathing. Her father turned to her and said softly, "You did something wonderful today." She smiled faintly and replied, "I just played what I felt." He nodded. That's what made it beautiful. The next morning, her father went to buy breakfast while Lily stayed home practicing. She didn't want to lose the rhythm she had found on stage. Every time her hands moved across the keys, she remembered how people had listened so quietly, how they had felt her music. A knock came at the door. Her father opened it to find a man in a suit holding an envelope. "For your daughter," the man said politely. Inside was a formal invitation printed on thick paper. It was from the same concert organizers. They wanted Lily to perform again, this time at a national charity gala in the capital, alongside famous musicians from around the world. Her father read it aloud to her. She froze for a moment, unsure what to say. "Me again?" He smiled. "Yes. They said people are still talking about your performance." Lily held the envelope in her hands, feeling the texture of the paper. "It doesn't feel real," she whispered. "It is real," he said proudly. "They heard your heart. That's why they want you there." The next few weeks were filled with preparation, but this time things felt different. Reporters started calling the house. Some wanted interviews. Others wanted photos. The local radio station even came by to record her playing. She wasn't used to the attention. She didn't know how to act when people called her the blind girl who plays like a dream. She didn't like that word, blind, being placed before everything else. She wanted to be known just as a musician, not as a miracle. Her father protected her from most of it. He would politely tell the reporters, "She just wants to play. That's all." And she did. She spent hours at the piano, practicing not just songs but feelings. Sometimes she'd stop mid-tune and say, "No, this doesn't sound like hope yet." Then she'd start over, playing softer, slower, until the melody carried the right emotion. A few days before the gala, they received another letter, this one directly from the event's star performer, Adrian Cole. His name alone carried weight in the world of music. He was the same man who had mocked her at the first concert, though she didn't know it yet. The letter was short and formal, inviting her to share the stage in the closing performance. Her father read it to her and hesitated at the name. "Adrian Cole," he said quietly. "He's one of the best pianists alive." Lily nodded. "Then I'll learn from him." Her father didn't tell her that this was the same man who had once laughed when he learned she couldn't see. He didn't want to upset her. He wanted her to go into this new chapter with pure heart and no anger. When they arrived in the capital city, the concert hall looked even grander than before. The air inside buzzed with energy and elegance. Famous faces walked past them. Artists, critics, and performers wearing sparkling clothes. The world here felt much bigger and faster than their little town. But Lily didn't let it overwhelm her. She held her father's arm and listened carefully to every sound. The rehearsal began the next day. Musicians took turns testing the grand piano, each one producing perfect, polished notes. Then it was Lily's turn. The room grew quiet when she stepped up. Her cane tapped gently against the floor as she moved. She found the piano by touch and sat down. "Take your time," someone said politely. She smiled. "Thank you. I always do." Her fingers began to play. The first few notes were light and shy, like a whisper, but soon her music filled the room. Every person there, from the stage director to the sound technician, paused to listen. Even Adrian Cole, who stood at the back reviewing his own sheet music, turned his head. When she finished, there was silence for a moment, then soft applause. She stood, bowed slightly, and walked back toward her father. As she passed Adrian, she heard him say under his breath, "Not bad for someone without sight." She stopped, unsure if she had heard right. Her father touched her shoulder and whispered, "It doesn't matter what others say. Let your music speak for you." That night she sat in her hotel room thinking about those words. She didn't know why some people doubted her. She had spent her whole life proving, not to others but to herself, that music didn't need eyes and it needed heart. Still, she couldn't ignore the sting in his tone. She placed her hand on the piano in her room and began to play again, letting the hurt flow out through the melody. By the time she finished, she felt lighter. The next morning, rehearsals continued. Adrian was practicing his own set and his performance was flawless. Quick, precise, every note in place. People stood around admiring his skill. But when he played, Lily noticed something missing. Though she couldn't see, she could sense emotion in sound. And his playing felt empty, like a painting without color. When it was her turn again, She played a new piece she had been working on secretly, one she had written for her mother. The melody rose and fell gently, like a lullaby turning into a storm and then calming again. When she finished, even Adrian didn't speak. He simply looked down at the piano, lost in thought. That evening, the organizers decided she would perform right before Adrian in the final show. It made her nervous, but she agreed. She didn't want competition. She wanted to share, yet deep down she wondered what he truly thought of her. The day of the gala arrived. The hall was filled with hundreds of people, famous musicians, critics, and television crews. Lily could feel the vibration of the crowd from backstage. Her father squeezed her hand gently. "No matter what happens, I'm proud of you," he said. She smiled. "I'll play for her tonight," she whispered. For Mama. When her name was announced, the hall grew silent. The host spoke about her story, the young blind pianist from a small town whose music had touched hearts across the nation. Lily stepped onto the stage, feeling the light warmth of the spotlight on her face. She found the piano and took a deep breath. As she began to play, the world disappeared again. There were no eyes, no whispers, no judgment, only sound. Her fingers moved like they were dancing, gentle and sure. The melody told the story of loss, hope, and faith. Some in the audience closed their eyes to feel it more deeply. Her father stood backstage, his hands pressed together in prayer. When the final note faded, there was silence. That deep, heavy silence she had felt once before. Then came the applause, rising like a wave. People stood again, some even shouting her name. She smiled faintly and bowed, not knowing that Adrian was watching closely, his expression unreadable. Then it was his turn. He walked onto the stage with his usual confidence and sat at the same piano she had just played. He began his piece, a fast and complicated classical performance. His fingers moved like lightning, but something was different tonight. Halfway through, he paused, just a slight hesitation, as if something had unsettled him. The audience noticed but said nothing. He finished perfectly, but when he stood up, he didn't smile. After the concert, Lily waited quietly backstage. She could hear people congratulating Adrian, and then a few approaching her, praising her performance. She thanked them softly. Then she heard footsteps stop near her. It was him, Adrian Cole. He didn't speak right away. For a moment, there was only silence. Then he said, "You play with something most people spend their lives searching for." She turned her head slightly toward his voice. "I just play what I feel." He nodded slowly. "Maybe that's what I've forgotten to do." Those words stayed with her long after he walked away. She didn't know if he meant them as kindness or reflection, but they touched her. That night, as she and her father returned to their hotel, she held her cane in one hand and smiled faintly. "Papa," she said softly, "I think my music reached someone tonight." He looked at her, his eyes full of pride. "It reached the whole world, my dear." But deep inside, Lily felt something more, a quiet understanding that her journey was far from over. The stage had given her voice, but her heart told her there was still more to learn, more to share. She didn't know what awaited her next, but she was ready for it. Outside, the city lights shimmered like stars she could not see, yet somehow she felt them, glowing softly inside her, one note at a time. The morning after the gala felt different. The world outside her hotel window was loud and busy, but inside there was a quiet sense of peace. The girl sat by the piano again, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. She played softly, not practicing for anyone, just letting the music flow like a whisper to herself. Her father watched from the small table by the window, smiling quietly. He didn't interrupt. He had learned that when she played like that, it meant she was thinking deeply. They were supposed to travel back to their small town that evening, but before they could leave, the phone in their room rang. Her father answered, and after a short conversation, he looked at her with surprise. "They want you to stay a few more days," he said. "There's another concert coming, a special one. They want you to perform with Adrian Cole." Her hands froze on the keys. "With him?" she asked softly. She remembered his voice from backstage, the one that had once sounded so cold. But she also remembered what he said after the gala. "Maybe that's what I've forgotten to do." There had been something honest in his tone, almost like regret. Her father nodded. "Yes, they said he requested it himself." She hesitated. "Do you think he really means it?" "I think," her father said with a small smile, "he finally learned what music truly is." That evening, she agreed to stay. The concert would take place in 3 days at the same hall, and this time it was a charity event for children with disabilities. The idea of performing for them made her feel warm inside. She knew what it meant to be looked at differently, to feel like you had to prove your worth in a world that didn't always understand. The next day, rehearsals began. When she arrived, she could sense the change in the air. Adrian was already there, sitting at the piano going over a few notes. The sound was smooth, practiced, but softer than before, more thoughtful. When he heard her cane tap gently against the floor, he stopped playing and stood up. "Good morning," he said quietly. "Good morning," she replied, unsure of what to expect. There was an awkward silence between them. He seemed unsure how to begin. Finally he said, "I wanted to thank you for your performance that night. You reminded me why I started playing in the first place." She smiled slightly. "Thank you. That means a lot," he continued after a pause. "I didn't treat you kindly before. I judged without understanding. That was wrong of me." She didn't speak right away. She could tell from his voice that the apology was sincere. "It's okay," she said softly. "Sometimes people only see with their eyes." He nodded even though she couldn't see it. "You're right," he said quietly. They began rehearsing together. At first it was difficult. Their styles were very different. His was strict and structured, hers was emotional and flowing. But as the hours passed, something started to happen. Their notes began to blend. He would play a line, and she would follow it with a feeling, turning his precision into something warm. It was like two worlds meeting in harmony. At one point she stopped and laughed softly. "You play like a clock," she teased gently. "Every note on time." He smiled for the first time. "And you play like a storm," he replied. "Every note has a heart." They both laughed. It was the first time he had laughed genuinely in a long while. When the rehearsal ended that day, Adrian asked, "Would you join me for dinner? I'd like to know more about how you learned to play." She hesitated but then nodded. "All right." They went to a quiet restaurant nearby. As they ate, he asked her about her childhood, about how she had learned to play without sight. She told him about her mother, how she used to guide her hands over the keys, teaching her to listen instead of look. She told him about the old piano by the window, the broken keys her father fixed, and how music had been her only light. He listened carefully without interrupting. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about fame or perfection. He was just listening. When she finished, he said softly, "I think your mother gave you more than lessons. She gave you purpose," she nodded. "And my father gave me courage." Adrian looked thoughtful. "You're lucky," he said quietly. "I had teachers, not family. I learned to play perfectly, but not to feel." There was a long silence between them after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that felt like understanding. The next 2 days went by quickly. They practiced side by side, creating something beautiful, a piece that began with his technical brilliance and ended with her emotional touch. The organizers loved it. "It's like two worlds becoming one of them said. On the day of the concert, the hall was filled again. This time there were children in wheelchairs, some with walking aids, some holding canes like hers. She could feel the energy of the crowd, soft, excited, full of warmth. Her father stood near the side of the stage, his heart swelling with pride. Backstage, Adrian turned to her. "Are you nervous?" he asked. She smiled. "Always. But in a good way," he chuckled softly. "Good. It means you care." As they stepped on stage together, the audience grew silent. The light was bright and warm. She found the piano by touch as always and sat beside him. He began the first few notes, slow, steady, perfect. Then she joined in, her melody rising gently like wind over still water. The sound filled the hall, weaving between their two worlds. Every note carried emotion, his structured, hers free. Together they told a story without words. At one point he paused slightly and looked at her. She felt it instantly and filled the gap with a soft phrase that lifted the music even higher. The audience could feel their connection, their understanding. It wasn't a competition anymore. It was a conversation between two souls who had finally learned to listen. When the last note faded, there was silence once again. Then came applause, not the polite kind, but the kind that comes from the heart. People stood cheering. The children in the front clapped excitedly, smiling wide. Adrian looked at Lily, his eyes wet with emotion. Without thinking, he stood and helped her up. guiding her gently to the center of the stage. Together they bowed. Afterward, backstage, reporters and organizers flooded in. They wanted interviews, photos, stories. But Lily was tired. All she wanted was quiet. Her father stepped forward and said gently, "She'll talk later. Let her rest." Adrian nodded in agreement. "She said everything she needed to," he said softly. Through her music. As the crowd thinned, Adrian turned to her one last time. "You've changed me," he said simply. "You reminded me that perfection isn't the goal. Connection is." She smiled gently. "Music only matters when it reaches someone's heart." He reached out and shook her hand. "Thank you for reminding me what music means." That night, when she returned to the hotel, her father poured her a cup of tea. They sat by the window, listening to the quiet city below. "You were wonderful," he said. She smiled faintly. "We both were," he nodded. "Do you think you'll perform with him again?" She thought for a moment. "Maybe, but I don't want to play with people. I want to play for people, for anyone who needs to hear something that makes them feel alive." Her father looked at her proudly. "Then that's what you'll do." Before going to bed, she sat at the small piano in the room and played one more time, a soft tune of gratitude. She didn't know where life would take her next. Maybe more concerts, maybe something else. But she knew she had already found what she had been searching for. Not recognition, not fame, but understanding. She had shown the world that even in darkness, one could create light, not by sight, but by soul. And as her final note faded into the night, she smiled, knowing that this was only the beginning of a journey that had no end, because music, like love, never really stops. The concert hall was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums before something beautiful begins. The girl stood near the curtain, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her dress. The scent of polished wood and faint perfume filled the air. She could hear the faint rustle of people taking their seats and the low murmur of conversation fading. As the lights dimmed, somewhere beyond that darkness sat Adrian Cole, the same man who had once mocked her, now waiting to perform beside her. She took a deep breath. Her father squeezed her shoulder gently and whispered, "Just play like you always do, from your heart." She smiled, even though she couldn't see his face. His voice was her comfort, the one thing that kept her steady. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we present a special duet performance. The renowned pianist Adrian Cole and a young blind pianist whose story has touched hearts around the world." A soft murmur rose from the crowd. The girl felt her heart beating fast as her father guided her toward the piano bench. She sat down carefully, placing her fingers on the keys to feel where she was. Adrian sat beside her, his posture sharp, elegant, his presence filling the stage. For a moment there was only silence. Two pianists, two worlds colliding under one light. Adrian leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "Follow my lead for the first part." She nodded. Then the first notes began. His playing was powerful, precise. Every key struck with control. The melody was flawless, but there was a strange emptiness in it, like something practiced too perfectly. When it was her turn to join, her touch softened the sound. The notes she played were tender, uncertain at first, then steady. Together, their music started to blend. Two styles meeting, two hearts finding the same rhythm. At first, Adrian's tempo felt too fast for her, but she followed with instinct, not sight. She listened, really listened, to every sound he made, every breath between notes. Slowly, she started to lead. Her hands moved with confidence, adding warmth to his sharpness, color to his control. The crowd sat completely still. They could hear something happening that wasn't written in the notes. It wasn't just a duet. It was a conversation, a story being told through sound. When the final note of the piece faded, the silence that followed was so deep, it felt sacred. Then the audience erupted into applause. The sound washed over them like a wave. Adrian looked down at the girl, a soft smile forming on his face. Not the kind of smile that came from pride, but from understanding. He stood and bowed slightly, then turned to her and whispered, "Your turn to take the spotlight." She stood slowly, unsure. The applause only grew louder. Someone in the front row shouted her name. She turned toward the sound, her expression full of quiet surprise. For the first time, she felt like the world wasn't seeing her blindness. They were seeing her gift. Backstage, after the performance, Adrian found her sitting quietly, holding a cup of tea. You changed the way I play, he said. She tilted her head slightly. How? He smiled. You reminded me that music isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest. She didn't answer right away. Then she said softly, That's all I've ever tried to do. The next morning, the newspapers carried headlines about the duet, about how the once arrogant maestro and the blind girl had created something unforgettable. Critics called it the most emotional performance of the year. The video of their concert spread across the internet, reaching millions. People who had never cared about piano music before were watching her play with tears in their eyes. But fame didn't change her. She still woke early to practice.
She still made breakfast with her father.
The only difference was that now the world knew her name. Invitations poured in from all over, music schools, TV shows, charity events. Yet she didn't rush to accept them. Instead, she told her father, I just want to keep learning. There's still so much I don't know. Adrian kept in touch. Sometimes he would call to ask about her progress, other times just to talk about music. Slowly, their bond grew, not as teacher and student, but as two musicians who understood each other beyond words. One evening, she received a letter. It was from a prestigious international music academy. They had seen her duet performance and wanted to offer her a full scholarship. Her father read it out loud, his voice shaking slightly at the words. She sat there silent for a long moment, then whispered, It's a dream, isn't it? He smiled, tears filling his eyes. No, my dear. It's real. The decision wasn't easy. She had never been away from her father or their little home. The thought of living in a new country surrounded by strangers scared her. But she knew it was time. If I want to make the most of what I've been given, she said softly, I need to take this step. The night before she left, she sat by her piano and played the same tune she had played the first time Adrian had heard her, the same song that had silenced the world. Her father stood by the door, listening, remembering how it had all begun, from a small cafe, from mockery, from a moment that had changed everything. When the last note faded, she turned toward him. I'll miss you, she said. He came closer, kneeling beside her. Wherever you go, I'll be right here, he said, placing her hand on his heart. The next morning, she boarded the plane with a small suitcase and a heart full of hope. As the engines roared, she thought about all the things ahead. New teachers, new stages, new music. She wasn't nervous anymore. For the first time in her life, she felt ready. And far away, back home, her father kept the piano exactly where it was, dusting it every morning, waiting for the day she would return and fill the room with her music again. But somewhere, deep down, he knew she wasn't just coming back as his little girl. She would come back as someone the whole world would remember. And across the ocean, in another city, Adrian Cole watched her plane disappear into the clouds. For a long time, he stood by the window of his studio, listening to the echo of their duet in his mind. Then he sat down at his piano, placed his hands on the keys, and began to play, not as a master, but as a man who had finally found his heart again. The academy she arrived at was nothing like the small town she had grown up in. The buildings were tall. The walls echoed with the sound of hundreds of instruments being practiced all at once. Every hallway she walked through was filled with music, violins, cellos, flutes, and of course pianos. She could feel it all, the rhythm in the floors, the vibration in the walls. Her father's voice still echoed in her head as she stood on the steps of the academy that morning. Don't be afraid of new beginnings. You're not walking into something unknown. You're walking toward what you were born to do. She held on to that thought as she entered the building with her cane, guided by a young staff member who introduced herself kindly. Everyone here already knows who you are, the woman said. Your performance with Adrian Cole, it's legendary. Those words made her nervous. She didn't see herself as a legend. She still felt like the same girl who practiced quietly in her room while her father cooked in the kitchen. The first few weeks at the academy were not easy. The schedule was strict. Hours of theory, practice sessions, and performance reviews. Most of the students there had been trained since childhood in elite schools. They came from famous families, spoke several languages, and played as if the piano were an extension of themselves. She often felt like an outsider. Some students admired her talent and treated her kindly, but there were others who whispered behind her back. She got here because of sympathy, she once overheard someone say. It's just a story and not skill. Those words stung. That night, she sat in her dorm room, her fingers pressed lightly on the edge of her keyboard. She played quietly, the same tune that had carried her through every challenge before. It was her way of talking to herself, of reminding her heart not to break under judgment. Her instructor, a kind but disciplined woman named Madame Laurent, soon noticed her unique style. "You don't play like others," she said after one session. "You don't see the notes, you feel them. That's rare, but if you want to stand on the biggest stages, you must learn to blend heart with discipline." Those words stayed with her, so she began to wake earlier than everyone else. While others still slept, she would be at the piano, fingers searching for the melody of the morning. Sometimes the janitor would stop to listen, smiling quietly as she filled the hall with soft golden notes. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, her name began to spread among the teachers and students. People stopped talking about her blindness. They started talking about her precision, her rhythm, her soul. Then one day, the Academy announced a major event, a competition that would bring together the most talented pianists from across the continent. The winner would receive a rare honor, a solo performance at the Royal Opera Hall. It was the kind of opportunity that could change a musician's life. When she heard about it, her heart skipped a beat. She wanted to try, but she also felt the weight of doubt. "Maybe I'm not ready," she told Madame Laurent. Her teacher smiled gently. "You are never fully ready for great things. You just begin and the music carries you." So she began preparing. The days leading up to the competition were long and exhausting. Her fingers ached from hours of practice, but she never complained. She practiced by listening, hearing every vibration, every tone, every silence between the notes. On the day of the audition, she could sense the tension in the air. Students filled the backstage area, whispering nervously. She stood quietly in a corner, her hands folded in front of her. The sound of one pianist after another reached her ears. Fast runs, technical brilliance, pieces full of fire. When her turn came, there was a pause in the room. Everyone seemed curious. She sat at the piano, took a slow breath, and began to play. Her fingers moved gently at first, tracing the melody she had written herself. It was a piece born from her journey, the sound of darkness meeting light, of pain turning into hope. Her playing was not perfect by technical standards, but it carried emotion so deep that the air in the hall seemed to tremble. When she finished, the judges said nothing for a few seconds. Then slowly they stood and clapped. The other students, even those who once doubted her, followed. She sat still, overwhelmed, tears quietly falling down her face. Days later, she received the news. She had been chosen as one of the finalists. Only 5 would compete in the final round, and she was among them. That evening, as she sat by her window, she thought about her father. She missed him terribly. Though they spoke often on the phone, she longed to sit beside him again, to hear his laughter in their small home. "I wish you were here," she whispered softly. A few days before the final competition, she received an unexpected call. It was Adrian Cole. His familiar, calm voice brought back a flood of memories. "I heard you made it to the finals," he said. "I'm proud of you," she smiled faintly. "I still remember what you told me that night, and to play from my heart." He chuckled softly. "You've done far more than that. You've reminded the world what music really means." Then he paused for a moment before adding, "I'll be there at the Royal Opera Hall. I wouldn't miss it for anything." The night of the final performance arrived. The grand stage was larger than anything she had ever stood on. The ceiling shimmered with gold light, and the audience filled every seat. Somewhere in the crowd, she knew Adrian and her father were both watching. When her name was called, the hall went silent. She walked slowly to the piano, guided by an usher. She sat down, her hands hovering over the keys. She could hear her own heartbeat. Then she began to play. The first note rang out clear and soft, followed by another and another. The melody grew gentle at first, then bold. She played not for victory, but for love. Love for her father, for the sound that had carried her through life, for the people who had once doubted her, and even for Adrian, who had taught her that even arrogance could change. As she reached the final section, she poured everything into the music. Her fingers moved faster, not out of showmanship, but emotion. It was as if her soul was speaking through the instrument. The audience leaned forward, held captive by the honesty in her sound. When she played the last note, it hung in the air like a secret. For a moment, no one moved. Then came a roar of applause, not polite, not restrained, but thunderous. Tears streamed down her face as she stood. Somewhere she could hear her father shouting her name, his voice full of pride. And then she heard Adrian's slow, steady clap from the front row, the sound of respect. She didn't know if she would win that night, but in her heart she had already won something greater, the right to be heard, not as a blind girl but as a true musician. When the results were announced later, her name was called as the winner. She stood frozen, her breath caught. The applause swelled again, echoing through the great hall. Adrian approached her on stage, took her hand gently and said, "Tonight, you didn't just play. You healed every heart in this room." And as the lights glowed above her and the world stood to cheer, she smiled through her tears, knowing that the journey that began with mockery had brought her to the highest note of her life, one that would echo forever. After her victory at the Royal Opera Hall, everything in her life began to change faster than she could have imagined. Newspapers around the world carried her story, not just about a blind girl who won a major competition, but about a soul who played music that touched the hearts of millions. Her name became a symbol of courage, determination, and grace, but even with all the praise and attention, she remained grounded. When she returned to the academy after the competition, she didn't act like a winner. She went back to her usual seat in the practice room, her fingers searching for the right keys as if she were still learning. When others congratulated her, she would simply smile and say, "I just played what I felt." Her teacher, Madame Laurent, often watched her quietly. "You've grown into something more than a pianist," she told her one morning. "You've become an inspiration." The girl shook her head. "I just want to keep getting better," she said softly. And that's exactly what she did. She spent the next year studying deeper into the art of composition, learning how to write her own pieces from scratch. Each melody she created carried a story, a memory of her childhood, her father's laughter, the warmth of her small home, and even the pain of being mocked. During one quiet evening in the music hall, she began to compose something new. It was a slow, emotional piece, soft yet strong, and she decided to call it Light Through the Dark. She wanted it to represent how even in the darkest times, there's always something shining inside every person. When Adrian Cole heard about her new work, he called her. His voice carried the same calm confidence as always, but this time, there was something gentler in it. "I heard you're writing something special," he said. She smiled faintly. "It's not just music, Adrian. It's everything I've lived." He was silent for a moment, then replied, "When it's ready, let me know. I'd like to perform it with you." Months passed as she worked on the piece. Every note was carefully placed, every rhythm born from emotion rather than logic. Sometimes she would spend hours trying to perfect a single passage, stopping only when the melody felt true. Finally, one evening, she played it for her teacher. When the last note faded, Madame Laurent simply whispered, "It's beautiful, it sounds like hope itself." The Academy soon decided to hold a special concert, not a competition, but a celebration of original works by its most promising students. They wanted her new piece to close the show. She agreed, but only on one condition: Adrian Cole would join her on stage again. The announcement drew massive attention. Music lovers from all over the world reserved tickets. Reporters called it the reunion of two souls who once began with rivalry but ended in harmony. On the night of the concert, the grand hall shimmered with golden lights. The audience waited with anticipation, whispering softly as the orchestra finished their opening numbers. When the girl stepped onto the stage, guided carefully toward the piano, the hall went silent. Adrian followed behind her, bowing to the crowd before taking his seat beside her. They didn't speak a word. Instead, they let the music begin. Light Through the Dark started with a single slow melody, her part alone, gentle and searching, like a voice calling out in the night. Then Adrian joined in, his notes steady and grounding, wrapping around hers like a guiding hand. Together, they created something extraordinary. Two pianists who didn't compete but completed each other's sound. The music built gradually, layer by layer, until it reached a peak of pure emotion. The audience sat frozen, unable to move or breathe. It was as if every joy, every loss, and every dream in the world had been captured in those notes. When the final chord lingered in the air, the silence that followed was almost sacred. Then came the applause, thunderous, endless, heartfelt. People stood on their feet, some even wiping tears from their eyes. Adrian leaned toward her and whispered softly, "You've done it again. You've made them feel." She smiled faintly and said, "It wasn't me alone. It was both of us. Light and shadow together." After the performance, journalists and fans gathered backstage, eager to speak with her. But instead of staying in the spotlight, she quietly excused herself and slipped away to the side room where her father was waiting. When he heard her footsteps, he turned quickly, his eyes already wet with pride. "I heard every note," he said, his voice trembling. "You played like the stars themselves were listening." She smiled as she reached for his hand. "I just wanted you to be proud." He hugged her tightly. "I always have been." In the weeks that followed, her piece spread across the world. Orchestras began performing it in different countries. Some said it gave them peace. Others said it reminded them to never give up. She received letters from people she had never met. Children who were blind, musicians who had lost hope, and even those who simply wanted to thank her for giving them courage through her music. But fame still didn't change her. She continued to practice every day, to write new pieces and to teach others at the academy. When young students asked her how she played so beautifully without sight, she would smile and say, "Because I listen not just with my ears, but with my heart." Years later, when Adrian Cole retired from performing, he invited her to take over his position at an international music foundation. "You are the future," he told her. "The world needs to hear your voice." She accepted, but only on the condition that the foundation would offer scholarships to children with disabilities. "Talent doesn't depend on what you see," she said during her first public speech as director. "It depends on what you believe." Under her guidance, the foundation became one of the most respected in the world. Hundreds of children who once thought their dreams were impossible found a place to learn and grow. One afternoon, many years later, she returned home to her old town. The streets were quiet and the little cafe where she once played had changed, but the piano still stood near the window. The owner, now an old man, recognized her immediately. "It's been a long time," he said warmly. She laughed softly. "It feels like another lifetime." He guided her to the piano and she sat down once more, her hands resting gently on the keys. Then she began to play the same tune she had played the very first time she was mocked, the same song that started everything. The sound filled the cafe, simple and sincere. People passing by stopped outside listening. They didn't know who she was, but they could feel the emotion in every note. When she finished, the owner clapped quietly. "Still as magical as ever," he said. She smiled. Music never forgets where it began. That night she sat by the window of her old home, her father's photograph beside her. The moonlight spilled across the room and she whispered softly, "We did it. Papa, we really did." Her story became more than just about blindness or talent. It became a reminder that the human spirit can turn pain into beauty, doubt into faith, and silence into song. And somewhere, across the world, whenever someone played her music, it was as if she were still there, smiling, listening, and reminding them that even in darkness, there's always a light waiting to be found.